around. So it's so good to run into you, and I love the music. So thank you for taking a minute out.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day,
Yes,
and I'm
absolutely.
I'm catching up on normal not-for-profit stuff. Writing end-of-year fundraising letters, and doing
Yeah,
grant narratives, things like that. So
good deal.
this
Well,
is what
what's that?
this is my administrative job. My other, I'm a percussionist in the orchestra here,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I play drum set in the pops. But my passion, is jazz, and so I've been playing drum set in big bands for my entire life. So
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a lot of things that you've seen change and transpire over time. So,
I still long for the old analog music business.
yeah,
I,
yeah,
I'll tell you something though, the indie music business, and especially the jazz world, recording and publicizing and marketing is still old school.
yeah.
It's not totally corporatized. It's at the personal level. So, that's where I want to stay.
I remember somebody during the pandemic saying that CDs were going to go away. We're getting to a point because,
Yeah.
just mailing things was going to create an issue and all of that. And I kept thinking, there's no way. There's way too much effort that's getting put into these. And even though a lot of people aren't dealing with CDs, it's still just kind of a backbone of this
Yeah.
promotion world.
Well, it's there's a need for artifact.
Yeah,
That's why serious connoisseurs are buying vinyl, They
yeah,
want something they can hold in their hands and listen and read while they listen. And
yeah,
it's something, I'm an avid reader too, and I can't bring myself to throw out an old book.
yeah, right. I get it.
Yeah, man, it's part
Yeah,
of your life after
that's it.
after you've made it part of your life. So
That's it.
anyways, but I think we sold like 5 or 6 copies of the CD. It's a download world these days.
It is. It
And it's a
certainly is.
streaming world too. It's really a drag to get a royalty statement you know, for like $27, because you're still up on there on satellite radio and Spotify.
Yeah.
And it's in detail, and you get Spotify 1 cent, Spotify 1 cent,
Uh-huh.
Spotify 1 cent. You're not going anywhere with that kind of
No.
change.
No, you're not. You're certainly not. Well, and that's the beauty of the jazz world is that it's fueled by love. There's always going to be that passion. There's going to
Yeah.
be that strong community no matter what happens.
Well, that's why we're nonprofits. We've joined the classical music world in that it's not a profitable pursuit
Yeah.
without meaningful support from you know well, in Europe it's from government.
Yeah. Right.
Here it has to be from individuals and foundations.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, let's get into the good
Yeah.
business. Let's get into the CNY Jazz Orchestra and the latest projects. But before we do that, we touched a little bit on COVID, but I really
Yep.
kind of want to know how did you survive that COVID time period and how has it changed you and the way that you approach the orchestra?
Sure. Now, are you going to edit this all together? Have we started already, or?
Yeah, yeah, and I can start over again. I'll start at the top. But yeah, I tend to follow the lead of the jazz world. You guys go in pretty quick, so I'm
Yeah.
marching in. But yeah, I'll start at the top and we'll edit that first part out and we'll just go from here.
Okay. So
Cool.
so so you want me to talk about the COVID effects?
Well, what I'll
Or-
do is I'll go ahead and intro again, and that way I got an edit point that I can go on. So Larry, it's great to meet you. Thank you, sir, for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on, Joe.
Yeah, you bet. So before we get in to the jazz orchestra, the new project, I want to know first and foremost, COVID was quite a time for all of us, and it really went through the, jazz community in a very specific way. How did you survive that time period, and how has it changed the way that you approach your music, the jazz orchestra in general?
Well, I can tell you that the effects were devastating, especially for the arts. We had hosted a performance of a jazz saxophone quartet in collaboration with our New Music Society here, and that was the night before the national shutdown. And we were all frightened and bewildered and didn't know what the future brought. Um, I actually had to talk my way into our building, Jazz Central, because the police stopped me and wanted to know why I was going to work. And I said, I'll be the only person in the building, so don't worry about it. And basically, I sat here alone for close to the first year. Everyone else worked remotely, and We survived, of course, by the largesse of the federal government because of the PPP loans that we got. But we also very quickly geared up and became a virtual recording facility. We started a series of music events called Live from Jazz Central. We brought some GoPro cameras. We bought software, and we already had a fully equipped theater with lighting and a grand. We bought a lot of plexiglass barriers, and we platooned small groups in here, and they performed. And we sold them to colleges around the region. This is when students were quarantined, sitting in their rooms. Mental health problems were on the rise. And the local colleges, notably Syracuse University, latched on to these broadcasts as a way for students to experience live local and regional music without having to leave their rooms. And they also played in big screens and student unions and such on various campuses around here. And it wasn't just jazz; it was good music, R&B, soul, alt rock, some spoken word / funk, and and that's how we got through things. And as a result, as we emerged, I'd be lying if I say we weren't a different organization in some ways.
Yeah.
But now we can offer recording services to anybody who wants to use our mini theater, our arts incubator, which we call Jazz Central.
And the
And
beauty of a lot of people that they really develop their technical acumen, and it just seems like it kind of expanded what you're already doing.
definitely, definitely. And I am no tech guru, believe me. But I know enough to turn things on and off and hire experts when necessary. So we gradually restarted our programs, and the project we're going to talk about is one of those restarts. It was written and performed and premiered almost 14 years ago now, and David Liebman, our guest artist, offered to record it with us on the spot. And then I couldn't find the grant money for over a decade. So I did find an ARPA recovery line that was specifically to bring back live programming that had been discontinued or gone virtual. And I jumped at it. We got the grant, raised some more money, and we were able to finish this project off.
That's wonderful. So what was it like? What was Dave is such a great cat and he's so good at what he does. What was kind of this, how did it all come together as far as you're concerned? And how did you ultimately feel about the final product?
Well, uh, it was a Sisyphean project, let me tell you that. We're going into year 14. It was a great launch due to my connections up at Syracuse University. I'm a former chair of their music business program, by the way, back in analog world, back in the old days. And in 2011, our orchestra's 15th anniversary of the CNY Jazz Orchestra, we got a commission from the SU Humanities Center. Their annual symposium theme was conflict, peace, and war. They commissioned our music director, Brett Zvacek, recently retired jazz studies director at SUNY Potsdam up in northern New York State. He did a wonderful job of writing a multi-movement suite for woodwind soloist and jazz orchestra. We invited Dave Liebman. He said, I'd love to come up and do it. And we world premiered it here in Syracuse in spring of 2011. And as I said before, he said, hey, this is great. Let's record it sometime. That stuck with me. And it took me until just a while ago to write that grant that made this happen. And of course, everybody was 12 years older and just coming out of the pandemic. So, but we shook the cobwebs off very quickly and recorded it live in Temple at Yeshurun, thanks to all those folks. And then the next day we stayed there and we recorded it live as well. And that began a very long post-production journey, which involved pretty much every long-distance technical problem that you can imagine. Personal illness of a key player, a glitch between a couple of channels that forced us to re-record a track or two. But we made it happen. We got an absolutely amazing master out of it. And we pushed it out globally. The drop date was this past August 10th. And it took off to our surprise. I just can't believe we're getting airplay on both sides of the Atlantic. Great reviews across the board. And I'm so thankful that we can release this work, which is serious music, but it's not outside in jazz terminology. It swings.
Yeah.
And it's very clearly on a, um, a reconciliation theme. It interweaves traditional Arabic with traditional Jewish thematic material and brings them to a resolution at the end. And we had absolutely no idea in 2011 that World Affairs would make this type of music so timely.
Yes.
So we are just dropping it out there on the world, and hopefully some people will gain a bit of understanding from listening to this music, as they do when they listen to any other piece which has a global intent, a symphony or a concerto or anything from the classical world. So I think the public should know that. They should give it a serious listen. It's about a half hour long. There are other tunes on the album by members of our orchestra. We're kind of a composer's orchestra, but it leads off the project, and I think it's a very enjoyable piece to sit and give a good half hour to, or listen to a particular individual movement at your leisure. If a White Horse from Jerusalem is the title of a poem that was the inspiration for the suite, but it is not a suite that's based on poetry.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We're living through such heavy times right now, and it just makes me feel like projects like this are so important because history tends to be kind of this revolving door, this carousel that we hop on and off. And it's interesting that it's been so long in the incubator, and now that it comes out, it has just as much socio-geopolitical importance as it would have then.
I absolutely agree. Who said it was either Mark Twain or maybe Dickens that said history doesn't repeat itself, but often it rhymes.
Yeah.
And that is very, very true. It's very cyclical,
Yeah.
and you know, human nature is what it is, and art is what it is. It tries to impart an understanding of self and an understanding of the world around us.
So before we get into your history with the CNY Jazz Orchestra, let's go back to your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? How did this music bug become what would become your career?
Sure. Um, Boy, that's a long story, but
Loaded question.
I'll keep it as short as I can. I'm a native Syracusan. I grew up with the great luck of living a block away from a marvelous teacher who started to instruction with me when I was 7. For some reason, I didn't turn away from it, and always brought this passion with me, and ended up turning back to music training in college after an initial year at RPI in engineering. And that was the spring of Four Dead in Ohio, and the colleges shutting down
Yeah.
all over the country. So it shook a lot of people up, including me. I decided to try to become the timpanist in the New York Philharmonic, which I thought would be easy at the time. So I transferred to the Eastman School and University of Rochester, and ended up playing in the jazz ensemble behind a faculty member who just taught there for a couple of years before he made it famous and went out to the coast, a guy named Chuck Mangione. He
Wow.
uh, he ran the first jazz, both jazz lap bands. I was in the first jazz lap band back in the early '70s. I left that experience to take a road offer from a group that backed up oldies acts, believe it or not. So I've got a few hundred gigs under my belt behind the big oldies reviews that would tour the country. And then when that wave petered out, I went back to school, studied classical percussion some more, and always played jazz throughout all of this, and decided that the road wasn't for me anymore. My hometown is Syracuse, New York. And so after auditioning for a lot of orchestras, I wound up playing in my own local orchestra, fine band, and also playing jazz, playing shows on drums and percussion around the region. And that led me to um, being convinced that jazz orchestras had to go not for profit. The jazz art form had to go not for profit. After those two Ronald Reagan recessions, Syracuse was hit hard as as a small Rust Belt former manufacturing city, and there's no place for musicians to play. We were forgetting how to play literally because there was no outlet for our art. And so I went to our arts council, got some seed money, started a jazz orchestra by audition, community wide. Um, our founding music director was a wonderful guy named Ray Shiner, ex-New York City musician, one of the finest, charter member of the Sauter Finnegan Band, the first true jazz orchestra with added instrumentation, harp, multiple woodwinds, and a couple added percussion. And he had, oddly enough, been the director of jazz studies, the very first one at SUNY Potsdam. He had retired to the Syracuse area, and he became our founding music director. And so we played a major concert series with the greats of jazz, a lot of NEA jazz masters, including David, until 2012 or 2013, when the effects of the Great Recession finally leveled out our organization. So we do most of our major programming in a cabaret setting right now. Back then we were a very vertical organization based more on the activities of the jazz orchestra. So and here I turned around and looked back, and all of a sudden CNY Jazz has been around almost 30 years.
Wow.
We're still intact. We're still vertical. We're bloodied and bruised a little bit, but we're still carrying the flag for the art form. And uh, we have a building with a theater in it. We perform in public and in schools all across the region. And I've got a staff to nurture. And I have to admit, I never thought it would come to this. We could have blinked out so many times
Uh-huh.
in the last 25 plus years. But the important thing about the arts and about the jazz business is just keep doing it. Don't
Yeah.
give up.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
for some strange reason, we're still standing. We must be doing something right,
You
right?
are. You certainly are. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, the cornerstone of what you do is obviously live music. You've had Dave in, a lot of NEA jazz masters, but for you, what was the first live jazz show you saw in your life that totally blew you away?
Good question. It would have to be Buddy Rich. We
Wow.
had we had a showroom north of Syracuse called the Three Rivers Inn, where all of the singers would come through, and occasional big bands would come through. I was still in high school, got a front row seat and watched Buddy's band. Joe LaBarbera, Don Menza had just left.
Wow.
Joe LaBarbera was playing lead tenor at the time, I remember, and they were playing the West Side Story suite and Channel One suite, and I was in heaven.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Buddy turned me around. And as a baby boomer, um, you can't underestimate the power of all of the great, what they used to call jazz rock bands that came out
Yeah.
in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah.
Blood, Sweat, and Tears, especially,
Yeah.
was an introduction to jazz styles for the baby boomers of America, as well as Chicago, as well as that great group that Will Lee and Billy Cobham were in called Dreams, and all of the other horn groups that came through, and R&B groups as well. We learned how to play funk, which became quote unquote fusion from
Yeah.
listening to Sly and the
Yeah.
Family Stone and groups like that. So I feel privileged to have gone through that part in American history because it really was an artistic primer for a lot of careers, including mine.
Well, it's interesting, when you live long enough on this planet, you get to build this bridge between the old world and the new. And you're always, like you said before, always going to have an appreciation for the analog. You're always going to have this appreciation for all of these. Um, I think there's some waves of jazz that went on that get vilified, but I think it was very essential for everybody to open up. I mean, Miles was leading that march. I mean, he was totally sending jazz into all these other realms,
Of
Yeah.
course.
So so it was definitely essential.
Exactly. And I was living in Rochester at the time. I lived there for several years, and my eyes really got open to jazz beyond the initial context that I had, like Buddy and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, um, by walking across a railroad bridge to get to the west side of Rochester, to go to a Chitlin Circuit club called the Pithod Room, and catching all of the greats, just nursing a beer in the corner and catching people like James Moody and Jimmy Smith when they would come through. It was an organ room. There was a big B3 next to the stage.
Yeah.
And freedom music was everything back then.
Yeah.
Music but Black American music, what consciousness was being raised. They were expressing themselves as Black Americans through their music for the very first time
Yeah.
as a part of all of the social upheaval. I call it social progress that happened in the late 60s and early 70s in the cities of the United States. So all of that bombarded me and young musicians like me at that time. And you know, the journey continues.
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, obviously you love all kinds of music, but more specifically for our purposes, why do you love jazz?
Why do I love jazz? Well, first of all, I love music. There are no aesthetic barriers to me. If I get a call from Nashville tomorrow to go on the road with a quality act, I'm going. I'm there because I know I'll be surrounded by national level professionals who are serious about everything that they do. And that's the goal of every musician. Um, I grew up playing in as a boy wonder drummer with guys in society bands 50 years older than me.
Yeah.
My first real band, self-contained band that I was in was a country western band. Sonny Sims and the Sodbusters. How's that for a name?
That's awesome.
We played in the North Country in New York. Uh, I learned how to play the snare drum and marched in a bagpipe band. So I got introduced to Celtic music at a very young, formative age. And of course, that turned into countless garage bands, turn proto jazz bands that we try to put together and play tunes by groups like Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And there wasn't really a jazz ensemble in the high school that I went to, so you had to do it by yourself. And
Yeah.
when I was coming up as a young man, there was a grand total of one jazz club in Central New York. It was a Quonset hut
Wow.
on a place, a long strip called Erie Boulevard in Syracuse. And we'd go in there and just listen and watch and listen and watch. And they had jam sessions on Sunday afternoons. Very well-known pianist, well-known nationally, now deceased, named Frank Stagnita, was nice enough to invite kids up to play a tune or two on Sunday afternoons. That was the way that we learned. Did not have the internet. We did not have the iReal book. We did not have downloading and streaming and endless instruction videos on YouTube. It's so much more convenient to learn now than it was for us baby boomers. So, we kind of came up in the old West
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. But in any case, I've never had personal barriers. I'm always willing to work in a musical environment with anyone. For 14 years, I was the percussionist in the Society for New Music, playing newly written chamber music by serious composers. I've been an orchestral musician. I got my first contract with the SSO in 1986. I've been doing it ever since. So once you make a pact with yourself and say to yourself, I'm going to make this my life, there's no turning back. And I haven't turned back. Jazz has always been central to me. It's probably the one of those moment to moment uh, exciting performance experience for me for a specific reason. You're not just playing every once in a while. You do very little rest counting. You're playing every second. You're responsible for the tempo, the entire texture, the um, the dynamics, the entire shape of every piece of music that you play. Um, and that's a challenge in itself
Yeah.
to make a piece of music the best that it can possibly be with 15 other people surrounding you, uh, relying on you in during this the dialogue and the interplay that is central to all jazz. It's a very different experience from lifting music off the page
Yeah.
in a classical ensemble. And it's also a very different experience from playing with no music in front of you in a
Right.
more small group. And I just love it. I've always had one foot in the classical world and another foot in the jazz and improvisatory world. And it all comes together when you work in a large ensemble.
For sure. So Larry, if anyone wants to pick up if a White Horse from Jerusalem, if they want to pick up that album or find out about CNY Jazz Orchestra, see you live, any of the good business that's going on, where can they go?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's everywhere. It's internationally distributed. You could go to Amazon or Apple Tunes. Yeah, you could also stream it on Spotify, but that only makes us a penny when you do that. If
Yeah,
if you really want to benefit our nonprofit as much as possible, go to our Bandcamp page,
yeah.
Bandcamp CNY Jazz Orchestra. It's all right there, all of the liner notes, all kinds of downloads, and or you could go if you'd actually like a hard copy, if you're still a collector you can go to our website, cnyjazz.org, cnyjazz.org, and order up a hard copy, and we'll mail it right out to you.
I love it. Larry, it's so great to meet you. Thank you, sir. Thank you for what you're doing with the Jazz Orchestra. Thanks for talking about this wonderful album. I've already profiled it on the show. I love Dave. I've talked to him. Just what a beacon for all jazz generations he is. So it's wonderful.
He certainly is. And let's both wish him well. Lieb,
Yeah.
be well, sir.
Yes,
You're
sir.
an icon in the jazz world. Thanks so
Certainly.
much, Phil. I really appreciate this time.
Yeah. Thank you.